Hi everyone, welcome to Mini Hack Solved. In today's episode, I will be solving the mini hack where we asked people to synchronize changes between Salesforce and a Postgres database using MuleSoft's Anypoint Studio. Now, for those people that don't know what a mini hack is, mini hacks is an area of Trailblazer DX and Dreamforce where attendees can come and challenge themselves to solve for a common use case. Now, we provide guidance on how to solve the mini hack, but we don't provide the exact steps needed to create the solution. So you're going to have to come along and sit down at this area and spend a little bit of time trying to unpick the requirements to provide a solution. So this is what a mini hack use case typically looks like. We have a use case at the top. In this case, we've got a fictitious financial services company wishing to synchronize customer information in Salesforce into a Postgres database. So previously that's been a polling mechanism and the team wants to explore moving to a more real-time integration. So instead of providing step-by-step instructions, you've really got the products you should be using listed at the top, and then some guided steps of what we would like to see in your solution. So let's walk through this together and actually solve this mini hack in real time. So the first thing I need is an Anypoint platform pre-trial. I already have one of those. We need MuleSoft's Anypoint Studio, which is the IDE integration developers use to build the integrations out, which I've already downloaded. And in the mini hack, that would already be available on the laptop. And I need a Salesforce Developer Edition org. This is going to mimic the application where we're going to be creating records and synchronizing them into Postgres. So give some guidance here. The solution has to use change data capture events in Salesforce, and it should be using the contact object. So step one, let's go into our Developer Edition org and set this up. Okay, so I've just switched into Salesforce. I've gone to the setup menu, and in quick find, I'll just search for change data capture. So it's under integrations. So what Salesforce allows an administrator to do is specify which standard or custom objects should be publishing an event whenever a change happens. So a create, edit, delete, or undelete. And at the moment, the administrator in this Developer Edition org has selected the account, the memo, custom object, and order. So these objects will be publishing events. But if you remember in the requirements, it asks for the contact object. So let's go ahead and add that by searching for contact in available entities, selecting it and clicking save. So in a few clicks, I've just specified that whenever a contact record changes or is inserted, I want that event to be published. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create the application that's going to listen for these events. Okay, so we have just set up change data capture in Salesforce and we've just used the contact object. Okay, so step two is to create a MuleSoft application with some modules. It's giving us some guidance what should be in here if we're not sure. The very first thing I need is a Salesforce connector, and we're going to use an operation called the replay channel listener to subscribe to contact change events. And it's saying use your username and password to connect to your Developer Edition org. And when you're listening for events, then the streaming channel should be set to this value. So I'm going to move into Anypoint Studio. Now this is pre-installed on the laptops, but if you wanted to download this, it's available as a free download. I'm going to create a brand new Mule project. We'll call it Mini Hack 1. So what I'm doing by creating a Mule project is creating the necessary files needed to eventually build an application that I can deploy somewhere. So it'll be a functioning integration. If you're new to MuleSoft, know that in the middle here, this is my canvas where I will be graphically building out the flow. On the right-hand side over here, we've got the modules and operations available to me to build that flow. And on the left-hand side, these are all the files required to build my application. So the very first thing I'm going to do under source main resources is to create a file to centralize the credentials I'm going to need to connect to Salesforce. So I'll create a YAML file called global. So the reason I'm doing this is so I can centralize the credentials so they're easy to change, and I'm not putting them within my application flow directly. And secondly, not relevant to the mini hack, but just as a best practice means I can have different credentials for different environments if I needed to. Okay, so the format this takes in would be something like this. I'd have my Salesforce credentials, username, password, token, and my Postgres credentials. Now these Postgres credentials actually come from the mini hack. So later on, we know we're going to be inserting into a Postgres database. And I can see here it's giving me the URL. I'm going to copy these credentials. It's what I would really do if I was doing the mini hack. Back into Anypoint Studio. Let's just paste these in. So the URL is going to be set to this. I need a username. I needed the database. And finally the password. Now I'll pause the video here and I'll be entering my username, password, and token. You would do the same in your mini hack before we switch back to the Mule flow. So I'll just pause temporarily here. Okay, so I've just entered my Salesforce credentials in the global.yaml file. We're now back in the mini hack 01 canvas. And I just did that by hitting the message flow tab at the bottom. You'll notice that it asked me to connect to Salesforce. Now, you can see on the right-hand side, I don't have a Salesforce connector or anything to connect to Postgres for that matter. So we can fix that by either searching for API assets in Exchange, or if it's commonly used, I can hit the add modules option here, and I'll have access to database and Salesforce. Two of the connectors we'll be needing. So I'm going to drag those from the right to the left, database and Salesforce, and you can now see that they're available to me in my Mule project. So the requirement stipulated that I should be using the replay channel listener. So I'll go ahead and select that as the operation and drag it into my canvas. So this is where you can start to see it get built out graphically. Now it's asking for some connector configuration, which is how do you want to connect to Salesforce? So I'm going to hit the Global Elements tab again. There are a few things I need to do. Now I've already got some authentication properties in my global.yaml file. But what I need to do is tell the Mule application that my configuration properties are in a file called global.yaml. So this will allow me to refer to the values in global.yaml using dot notation. Now I can create my Salesforce configuration. And you can see here there's various ways of connecting to Salesforce. We're just using basic authentication. And instead of typing my password now, I can simply do $ open close curly brackets, and then in the global.yaml file we said salesforce.username. So I can repeat that for the password. And for the token. So a good thing to do is just click the test connection button. This will just verify I haven't made a typo in the username or password. So test connection successful typically means everything's looking good. So I'll save that configuration, and then I'm going to get ahead of the game here and create one for the database configuration as well. So the connection type, I'm connecting to a Postgres database, so I can select generic connection. I do need to give it a JDBC driver, so I can add a Maven dependency. There'll be various ones for a Postgres database. And then again, for the URL, username and password, it's all specified in my global.yaml file, except it's postgres.url, postgres.username, postgres.password. And for the driver class name, I think that's in the requirements. If we go back, yeah, driver class name should be this. And again, always good just to test the connection. Okay, so that test connection was successful. I'll save the configuration properties. So now we have a database configuration and a Salesforce configuration. If I go back to my MuleFlow, you'll see that it automatically knows that there's one Salesforce configuration that I've set up, so it automatically selects it. I just need to set now, you can see by these red crosses, the streaming channel and the replay option. So in the mini hack, I think it told me the streaming channel should be set to data contact change event. And the replay option, I'll only do new. So contact change events, the advantage of them is I can replay events that if my Mule application stops running, I can resume from the last event it processed. But in this instance, for the mini hack, we'll only process the new events. Okay. So it looks like step one's completed. We're now subscribing to the change data capture event from Salesforce, and we got us slightly ahead of the game because we've just configured the properties I need to connect to Postgres as well. Okay, let's have a look what else it's asking us to do. So we've created the replay channel listener. It's asking us to log the inbound payload so we can see it in the log files. So under core, because logger would be core to MuleSoft, I will add a logger event. So I'll drag it into my canvas, and it's asking us to log the inbound payload. Now, I happen to know that for change data capture events, I'm going to add a little bit of data weave here. Now, data weave allows me to use dot notation to navigate the payload that Salesforce is going to send me and then output it as JSON. Then it's asking me to set 3 variables. One needs to be called SFDC underscore ID, which is going to correspond to the Salesforce record ID. One called last name, which should correspond to the last name in the payload because it's the contact object, and one for change underscore type. And it's giving me the values to use. So I'm going to copy this first one, navigate back to Anypoint Studio, and you can see I've got a transformer available to me at the bottom here called set variable. So I'll drag that onto my canvas, and there are 2 variables I need to set, name and value. So the name they wanted was salesforce.com underscore ID, and the value they asked me to use this. So this is referring to the inbound payload. Within there's something called data payload, and in the change event header, I'm going to select the first value, and that will be the record ID from Salesforce that instigated the change. And I know I needed 2 other set payloads, so we'll just add those now. 1, 2, and just for best practices, so we can see which we're doing, this is setting the Salesforce record ID. So I'll just change the label so I can see it graphically appear. This one was setting the last name. So it should be last underscore name. And again, in the requirements, I can always go back, set a variable called last name to the corresponding value. This is where it is in the payload. So within the payload, there's something called name, which will probably have first name, last name, middle name, and we'll select the value for last name. And the final one was setting the change type, because change data capture events can be create, or they can be delete, or they can be update. So we really want to capture in a variable name, I think it was change type, change underscore type, we want to capture the value. So just checking change underscore type should be set to the type of change operation. And it's giving me the value to use. And it gives me the value in the mini hack because if you're not familiar with change data capture events, it would be hard to know that without inspecting the value. So move rid of a space there. So we're getting the value or the event that Salesforce is firing. We're listening to it. We're now going to log it so we can see what value Salesforce sent us. Then we'll extract the record ID, the last name, and the change type into variables we've given names to. Next is when it's asking us to determine if the type of change is a create. And it's saying that to add that logic, you can use the following syntax: vars.changeType equals create. Now, if you were a programmer, you'd probably use an if-else statement here. So MuleSoft builds that graphically with flow control, and you can see here I have a choice operation. And the choice operation, when I drag it into my canvas, you can see gives me a when something is true and a default, and I can build out multiple options here. So again, let's relabel this from choice to is change a create ? And then I'm going to highlight this when box, and now I can use an expression. Now vars allows me access to any of the variables I've previously set. So we had 3 set variable steps previously, one to set the ID, last name, and change type. So since I want to compare something to change type, I can select it, make sure I don't have any typos, equals create. So if the change type is create, it's going to execute this box at the top. If it's not a create, it will go into the default step below it. Okay, let's go back to the requirements, see what else we need to do. Then it's saying insert from the database module, which we've added already, to insert a row into Postgres when the type of change is create, which we've sort of configured in the previous step. It's giving us the connector configuration, which we've already set up in our global.yaml file. And then it's saying that I need to use a SQL statement that inserts into the customer table. And then it's giving me the columns in Postgres that it's using: Postgres Salesforce ID and Postgres last name. So I just need to insert those 2 values. Alrighty. So let's have a look what that might look like. So under database, let's see if we have an insert operation. There's one here. Let's drag it only if the change type is create. We don't want to create a record if it's to delete or edit. It's asking me for the connector configuration. So we've already specified ours in database.config. And now it's saying what is the SQL that we're going to create. So in order to do that, I'm going to substitute in 2 dynamic values that we've set previously. So the record ID and the last name. And I can do that using input parameters at the bottom here. So I can say, using curly brackets, that I want to set up a variable called sfdcid, and it needs to come from vars.sfdcid. And then I'll do something similar for last name, because in my variables, I should see last name. So we'll select that. Now, when I write a bit of SQL now, insert into the table was called customer. I just need to know the column names. Let's just copy these directly so I don't make a typo. So insert into customer with the columns PG Salesforce ID, PG last name, the values, and this is where we can use the substitution values that we set down below, sfdc underscore ID, comma, last underscore name. So I'm basically saying these are the dynamic substitution variables I want to use. I'm going to use the variables I've set previously. I'm going to insert into the table called customer. These are the column names that came from the use case requirements, and the values I'm going to insert came from Salesforce because I set them as the variables earlier. Okay, let's go back to the requirements. What else is it asking me to do? Nothing. It's just saying now I need to run my application. I should be able to verify in the logs that the inbound payload is visible. And then it's given me a page to navigate to see my newly inserted record, where I can check the record ID and the last name values I've used. Okay, so if I right click in my canvas, I've got the option to run my mini hack 1 project. So I'm going to select that and let that run. You can see at the bottom here, if you look at the logs, this is where it's actually building my Mule application. Now, whilst that's building, let's navigate to the page that was linked at the bottom. So the mini hacks gives you an area. You don't have to connect to the Postgres database. There's a user interface to do it for you. I'm just going to refresh this screen, and you can see at the bottom, there's one record there at the moment with a last name of 2, created on the 8th of December, and this was the record ID that was inserted. So hopefully, once our Mule application is built, if we go into our developer edition org and create a contact, we should not only see the payload logged in our Mule application, but we should see an additional row in the Postgres database, because this application is really just showing me what's in the Postgres database behind the scenes. Alrighty, let's switch back to Anypoint Studio. So you can now see this is what you should get. Status of deployed with no errors, and you can see here the last log was it's subscribing to the contact change event. So let's switch to Salesforce. This is where we left it after adding contact to our change data capture events. Let's create a brand new contact, because remember, we're only listening for the create change type. If we edited a record, then it would go into the default section in our application flow and do nothing. So we'll create Maxine, Mule, and click Save. Now there's two things we'll check. We'll go back into Anypoint Studio. Because we had this logger event, what we should see is we should see the payload logged. And if we make this window at the bottom a little bit bigger, you can see here that the logger has specified some output here. It's given me the fact that I've created a record. You can see here that the change type is create. So if I edit Maxine now, you will see another event logged, but the change type will be update. I can see the record ID that was logged. So Maxine has an IAAA suffix. And we'll be able to see the records that were set. In this case, that it was Ms. Maxine Mule. So the last name that should have been set is Mule. The record ID we should see is Go IAAA. So let's open up the last page, refresh to show the contents of the Postgres database. And there we can see the most recent record with the Go IAAA suffix is Maxine Mule. We just created the last name with a credit date of 11th of December 2002. And that is it for today's mini hack. We have just synchronized changes from Salesforce to a Postgres database using MuleSoft. We used Anypoint Studio to graphically build out an end-to-end integration using connectors, so I didn't have to write any boilerplate code, and I graphically built something out in 10 minutes. We used the change data capture facilities in Salesforce and subscribed to them in our Mule application. We logged the inbound payload so we could see what was being sent. We extracted a couple of variables out by inspecting that payload. So we used the Salesforce ID and the last name values before having a choice. So based on the change type, was it a create, edit, or delete? We then decided whether we wanted to insert that into a Postgres database. So I hope you found that fun and intuitive. If you liked it, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to other mini hack solve videos like this one.